There is a grass that grows 4 inches in a single day, produces more protein per acre than soybeans, feeds cattle and goats and chickens and pigs without a single bag of commercial feed, and when dried, burns hotter than coal. It is not illegal in the way a controlled substance is illegal, but in more than 30 states, planting it comes with restrictions, permits, or outright prohibitions that make no sense until you understand who profits from your ignorance. The plant is Napier grass, also known as elephant grass, and its proper scientific name is Pennisetum purpureum. It has been called the most productive forage plant on Earth by agronomists who study it quietly and never get invited to speak at the conferences funded by the feed industry. 1 acre of this grass, managed properly, produces enough forage to feed 8 to 12 head of cattle for an entire year. 1 acre. No grain supplements, no corn silage, no hay deliveries at $400 a load. And here is what should stop you cold. The average American cattle rancher spends between $1,100 and $1,400 per animal per year on feed alone, according to USDA cost of production surveys. That money flows directly into an industry worth over $60 billion annually. Now ask yourself a question you will not hear asked at any extension office in this country. If a single perennial grass could replace most of that spending, who exactly benefits from making sure you never plant it? By the time you finish watching this, you will never look at your pasture, your feed bill, or your woodpile the same way again. Because what they told you was a weed problem is actually the solution to 3 of the biggest expenses on any homestead. And the people who buried that knowledge had very specific financial reasons for doing so. Napier grass is not a recent discovery. It is not some laboratory creation or a genetically modified organism cooked up in a corporate greenhouse. This plant has been feeding civilizations for centuries, and its story begins in sub-Saharan Africa, where it grew wild along riverbanks and floodplains in what is now Uganda, Kenya, and Ethiopia. The Maasai and Kikuyu peoples used it as primary livestock forage long before Europeans arrived on the continent. They understood something that modern agriculture has spent 70 years trying to make you forget. A grass that grows this fast, this densely, and with this much nutritional content does not need to be replaced by grain-based feeding systems. It just needs to be planted and managed. When British colonial agronomists encountered Napier grass in the early 20th century, they were stunned. Colonel Ninon Napier, for whom the grass is named, brought samples back to research stations in the 1920s. British agricultural papers from that era describe a plant that could be cut 6 to 8 times per year, regenerated from its own root system without replanting, and produced dry matter yields that dwarfed any temperate forage crop known in Europe. By the 1930s, tropical agricultural stations across the British Empire were recommending it as the foundation of low-cost livestock systems. Then something shifted. After World War II, the American agricultural model began its global expansion. This was the era of Earl Butz, the Secretary of Agriculture, who told American farmers to get big or get out. It was the era when corn became king, not because it was the best feed crop, but because it was the most profitable crop for the companies selling seed, fertilizer, and herbicide. The petrochemical industry had massive surplus production capacity after the war. Nitrogen fertilizer is essentially repurposed munitions chemistry. The same factories that made explosives pivoted to making ammonium nitrate for cornfields. And corn-based livestock feed became the backbone of a system that required farmers to buy inputs every single season. A perennial grass that never needs replanting, requires no synthetic fertilizer, and outproduces corn in total biomass per acre was not just inconvenient to this model, it was an existential threat. By the 1960s, Napier grass had quietly disappeared from USDA research priorities. Funding for tropical and subtropical forage research was redirected toward corn silage programs and commercial hay production. Land-grant universities, increasingly funded by agribusiness partnerships, stopped teaching perennial tropical grasses to animal science students. The knowledge did not vanish because it was wrong. It vanished because it was too right and too cheap and too independent of the supply chain that was making powerful people very wealthy. By the 1970s, a generation of American farmers had grown up without ever hearing the name Napier grass, even though it grows readily in every state south of the 35th parallel and in protected microclimates well north of it. So why does this grass do what it does? What is actually happening at the biological level that allows a single plant to grow 4 inches in 24 hours, produce massive tonnage on minimal inputs, and deliver nutritional content that rivals purpose-bred feed crops? The answer starts with photosynthesis, but not the kind you learned about in school. Most grasses and crops that Americans are familiar with, things like wheat, oats, Kentucky bluegrass, and fescue, use what scientists call C3 photosynthesis. This is the standard carbon fixation pathway where the plant captures carbon dioxide and converts it into a 3-carbon molecule. It works, but it is inefficient, especially in warm conditions. When temperatures rise above 85 degrees Fahrenheit, C3 plants actually lose efficiency because of a process called photorespiration, where the plant essentially wastes energy by reprocessing oxygen instead of carbon dioxide. Think of it like an engine that starts burning its own exhaust above a certain RPM. The hotter it gets, the worse it runs. Napier grass uses C4 photosynthesis. This is a fundamentally different engine. In C4 plants, carbon dioxide is first captured into a 4-carbon molecule in specialized cells, then concentrated and delivered to the Calvin cycle in bundle sheath cells deep inside the leaf tissue. This concentration mechanism means the plant almost never suffers from photorespiration. The hotter and sunnier it gets, the more efficiently it runs. While your fescue pasture is struggling through a July afternoon, Napier grass is accelerating. It is literally designed by evolution to thrive in exactly the conditions that shut other grasses down. The numbers bear this out in ways that should make any livestock owner sit up and take notice. A well-managed stand of Napier grass in the southeastern United States can produce between 25 and 40 tons of dry matter per acre per year. Compare that to a good stand of Bermuda grass, which produces 4 to 8 tons, or corn silage, which produces 7 to 12 tons on heavily fertilized ground. Napier is outproducing corn silage by a factor of 3 to 4, and it does it without annual replanting, without seed purchases, without heavy nitrogen applications, and without the herbicide programs that corn demands. The protein content is what makes this relevant to your animals. Fresh Napier grass cut at the right stage, roughly 3 to 4 feet tall, contains between 9 and 12% crude protein on a dry matter basis. That is comparable to good quality grass hay and only slightly below alfalfa. But here is the critical comparison your feed dealer does not want you to make. When you account for total protein production per acre, Napier grass produces approximately 2,400 to 3,800 pounds of crude protein per acre per year. Soybeans, the supposed protein king of American agriculture, produce roughly 1,200 to 1,500 pounds of protein per acre. Napier delivers roughly 2.3 times more protein per acre than soybeans, and it does it as a perennial that comes back year after year from the same root crown, without tillage, without planting, and without the soil erosion that annual soybean cropping creates. Your land actually gets better the longer Napier grass grows on it because the massive root system builds organic matter and prevents compaction. There is another property of this grass that almost nobody talks about, and it connects directly to your energy costs. Napier grass, when dried and either chipped or compressed into pellets, has a British thermal unit rating of approximately 8,200 to 8,500 BTUs per pound. Bituminous coal, the most common grade used in residential and small-scale heating, ranges from 8,000 to 14,000 BTUs per pound depending on quality, with the lower grades sitting right at 8,000 to 9,000. Dried Napier grass burns at the same thermal output as low-grade coal, and unlike coal, it regrows every year from the same root system, produces no sulfur dioxide emissions, and costs you nothing beyond the labor of cutting and drying it. You can heat your home, your workshop, and your greenhouse with a grass that you grow on your own land. That fact alone should tell you everything you need to know about why this plant was quietly erased from the American agricultural conversation. Now, let us follow the money, because that is where the real story always lives. The American animal feed industry is worth approximately $64 billion annually. That includes corn, soybean meal, hay, commercial feed pellets, mineral supplements, and the logistics of moving all of it from where it is grown to where it is consumed. The average small cattle operation in the United States spends between 30 and 50% of its total operating budget on purchased feed. For poultry operations, that number climbs to 65 to 70%. Every dollar of that spending represents a dollar that would not be spent if the farmer grew a perennial forage crop that met the same nutritional requirements on their own land. The residential heating fuel market adds another layer. Americans spend approximately $72 billion a year on home heating, including natural gas, propane, heating oil, electricity, and wood. Rural homesteaders, the very people who could most easily grow Napier grass, are disproportionately dependent on propane and heating oil, the two most expensive options. The average rural household in the Southeast spends between $1,800 and $2,500 per year on heating fuel. A half-acre stand of Napier grass, properly dried and processed, can produce enough biomass fuel to offset most or all of that cost. Now add those two numbers together, and you begin to see the scale of what is at stake. Between the feed industry and the heating fuel industry, we are looking at well over $130 billion a year, flowing out of rural households and into corporate supply chains. A plant that replaces both feed and fuel is not just a homesteading curiosity. It is an economic disruption that the companies benefiting from the current system have every incentive to prevent. And they have prevented it, not through outright bans in most cases, but through something more subtle and more effective: silence. Napier grass is not taught in extension programs. It is not included in USDA forage trials in any meaningful way. It is not featured in the catalogs of the major seed companies because there is no seed to sell. Napier grass is propagated vegetatively through stem cuttings, which means once you have it, you never need to buy it again. You just cut a stalk, stick it in the ground, and walk away. There is no recurring revenue model for the seed industry. There is no annual purchase. There is no customer retention. There is only a farmer who becomes permanently self-sufficient. And in the modern agricultural economy, a self-sufficient farmer is a lost customer. The restrictions placed on Napier grass in various states often cite invasiveness as the concern. And it is true that in certain tropical and subtropical environments, Napier grass can spread aggressively. But the same is true of kudzu, which was actively promoted by the USDA for decades. The same is true of Bermuda grass, which no one regulates. The same is true of Johnson grass, which is a federally listed noxious weed in some states yet grows freely across millions of acres with no enforcement whatsoever. The selective enforcement around Napier grass is not about ecology. It is about economics. A plant that cannot be monetized through seed sales, that eliminates the need for commercial feed, and that replaces fossil fuel for heating is a plant that powerful interests want controlled, not for your protection, but for theirs. But the knowledge never completely disappeared. There are communities and individuals who never stopped using Napier grass, and their results tell you everything you need to know about what is possible on your land. In the highlands of Kenya, where the British colonial introduction of Napier grass actually took root and remained part of the farming culture, smallholder dairy farmers routinely keep 2 to 4 dairy cows on less than 2 acres of Napier grass. These farms produce between 15 and 20 liters of milk per cow per day, which is competitive with confined dairy operations running on expensive grain-based rations. The Kenyan government, unlike the USDA, actively promotes Napier grass through its agricultural extension service because Kenya does not have a $64 billion feed industry to protect. In Brazil, large-scale beef and dairy operations in Minas Gerais state have adopted Napier grass as their primary forage crop since the 1980s. Brazilian research published through Embrapa, the National Agricultural Research Corporation, shows that cattle finished on Napier grass-based systems reach market weight only 12 to 15% slower than grain-finished animals, but at roughly 40% lower cost. The meat quality, measured by marbling and tenderness, is comparable to grass-fed beef that sells at premium prices in American supermarkets. Brazilian ranchers running Napier-based systems report that their per-head profit margin is actually higher than their grain-feeding competitors because their input costs are so dramatically lower. Closer to home, there are homesteaders in southern Louisiana, coastal Texas, and central Florida who have been quietly growing Napier grass for decades. One family operation outside Houma, Louisiana, has maintained a 3-acre stand of Napier grass for over 20 years. They feed 12 head of cattle, a flock of 30 laying hens, and a dozen meat goats almost entirely from that single planting. Their annual feed purchase consists of mineral blocks and occasional corn as a treat during handling. Their total feed expenditure runs under $600 a year for the entire operation. A comparable operation buying commercial hay and feed in their area would spend between $8,000 and $12,000 annually. That is not a theory. That is a household budget that proves the point every single month. These survivors did not have special knowledge. They did not have advanced degrees. They simply refused to abandon something that worked, even when every institution around them told them to modernize, to specialize, to buy their way into the industrial system. Their livestock is healthy. Their soil is deep and dark. Their bank accounts are not drained every spring by input purchases. They are living proof that the system we were told was the only option is actually just the most expensive one. So here is how you do this on your own land, starting with almost nothing. And I mean that literally. You do not need to buy seed. You do not need specialized equipment. You need a few stem cuttings, some bare ground, and the patience to let the biology do what it has been doing for millions of years. The first thing you need is planting material. Napier grass is not grown from seed in any practical sense. It is propagated from stem cuttings, which means you need to find someone who already has it. In the southern states, this is easier than you think. Check with small-scale tropical forage growers, permaculture networks, and online homesteading communities. A single mature stalk can be cut into 3 or 4 sections, each with at least 2 nodes, and each of those sections will produce a new plant. You need roughly 8 to 10 stalks to get started, and from those you can cover a quarter acre within your first growing season through successive division. Prepare your planting area by clearing any existing vegetation and loosening the top 6 inches of soil. You do not need to till deeply. Napier grass roots are extraordinarily aggressive and will penetrate compacted subsoil on their own within the first season. Cut your stalks into sections roughly 12 to 18 inches long, making sure each piece has at least 2 visible nodes, which are the slightly swollen rings where leaves emerge. Lay these cuttings at a 45-degree angle in a shallow trench about 3 inches deep, with at least 1 node below the soil surface and 1 above. Space them roughly 3 feet apart in rows that are 3 feet apart. Water them in well, and then leave them alone. Within 7 to 14 days, depending on your soil temperature and moisture, you will see green shoots emerging from the exposed nodes. This is the plant establishing its initial leaf structure. Do not cut it. Do not graze it. Let it grow undisturbed for the entire first season. This is the single most important instruction, and it is where most people fail. The temptation to cut it early or turn animals into it is strong, but the first season is when the plant is building the root crown that will sustain it for 20 years or more. That root system needs uninterrupted growth to reach the depth and density that makes Napier grass so resilient and productive. By the end of the first growing season, your plants should be 8 to 12 feet tall, and each original cutting will have produced a clump of 6 to 12 stalks. The base of each clump will be thick and woody, and beneath the soil, a massive root crown will have formed. At this point, you can take your first harvest. Cut the stalks to a height of roughly 4 to 6 inches above the ground. Do not cut flush with the soil because the above-ground stub contains the bud tissue that will produce the next cycle of growth. Within 10 to 14 days of cutting, new shoots will already be visible, and within 6 to 8 weeks, the stand will be ready to cut again. For animal feed, the key is cutting height at harvest. You want to cut Napier grass when it is between 3 and 4 feet tall for maximum nutritional value. At this stage, the crude protein content is at its highest, the fiber is digestible, and the palatability is excellent. Cattle, goats, sheep, and pigs will all eat it readily at this stage. If you let it grow past 6 feet, the stems become woody, and the protein content drops significantly. For fuel production, you want the opposite. Let it grow to full height, 8 to 12 feet, then cut and dry it thoroughly. The mature woody stems have the highest BTU content and the lowest moisture, which means they burn cleanly and efficiently. Drying is straightforward. Cut the stalks and lay them in the sun on any clean, dry surface. In the summer heat of the south, they will reach adequate dryness for burning in 4 to 7 days. You will know they are ready when the stalks snap cleanly rather than bending, and when you can hear a hollow sound when you tap 2 pieces together. Store them under cover, off the ground, exactly as you would store firewood. They will keep indefinitely as long as they stay dry. For your animals, you can feed the fresh-cut grass directly by laying it along fence lines or in feed troughs. Cattle will consume roughly 2 to 3% of their body weight in dry matter per day, which means a 1,000-pound cow needs about 20 to 30 pounds of dry matter daily. A well-managed quarter-acre stand of Napier grass, cut on a 6 to 8 week rotation, can produce enough forage for 2 to 3 mature cattle throughout the growing season. For winter feeding in areas where Napier grass goes dormant, you can dry and store the last 2 or 3 cuttings of the season as hay. It stores just like any other dried grass, and animals accept it readily throughout the winter months. The most common failure point is overgrazing or overcutting in the first 2 years. If you cut too frequently or too low before the root crown is fully established, you will weaken the stand and it may thin out. The rule is simple. Never cut more than 70% of the standing foliage in a single harvest, and never cut below 4 inches. Follow this rule, and your stand will not only survive, it will expand on its own through lateral root spread, giving you more forage area every year without replanting. By the end of your second season, you will have a self-sustaining forage and fuel crop that requires no seed purchases, no fertilizer, no herbicide, and no irrigation in areas that receive more than 30 inches of annual rainfall. Your animals will be eating well, your feed bill will be a fraction of what it was, and you will be sitting on a renewable fuel supply that costs you nothing but labor. That is the result the feed companies and the fuel companies do not want you to experience, because once you experience it, you will never go back. What makes Napier grass even more powerful is that it is not an isolated trick. It is the entry point to an entire system of perennial tropical and subtropical grasses that work on the same C4 photosynthetic principle and offer the same independence from commercial supply chains. Once you understand what Napier grass can do, you begin to see opportunities everywhere. Miscanthus, sometimes called silvergrass, is a close relative that is cold hardy to USDA Zone 4, which means it can be grown across most of the continental United States. It does not match Napier's growth rate in warm climates, but it produces 15 to 20 tons of dry biomass per acre in temperate regions, and has an even higher BTU rating when burned. It is already used as a commercial biomass fuel in Europe, where farmers receive government subsidies to grow it. In America, almost nobody knows it exists. Vetiver grass is another member of this family that deserves your attention. It does not spread laterally like Napier, which makes it ideal for erosion control on slopes and stream banks. Its roots grow straight down to depths of 10 to 13 feet, creating a living anchor that stabilizes soil far more effectively than any engineered solution. It also produces essential oils that have commercial value, and its dense leaf structure provides excellent forage for goats and sheep. A hedgerow of vetiver planted across a slope above your Napier stand creates a water management system that channels rainfall into your forage crop while preventing erosion on the hillside. Moringa, while not a grass, operates on the same principle of extraordinary growth rate and nutritional density. A moringa tree can grow 12 to 15 feet in its first year and produces leaves with 25% protein content by dry weight. Mixed with chopped Napier grass, moringa leaf creates a complete feed ration that rivals commercial pellets in nutritional profile. Growing moringa and Napier together on the same acre gives you a self-contained feeding system that handles protein, energy, and roughage without a single trip to the feed store. Together, these plants represent a perennial food and fuel system that is entirely self-propagating, requires no purchased inputs after establishment, and becomes more productive over time as root systems deepen and soil biology matures. This is not a single tip or a clever hack. This is a fundamentally different way of operating a homestead, one that was standard practice for most of human agricultural history and was only abandoned when it became more profitable for someone else to sell you replacements for what your land already provides. Every one of these plants has been quietly studied, documented, and then shelved by institutions that depend on your continued participation in the commercial input economy. The knowledge you have just received is not new. It is old. It is older than the corporations that tried to bury it, older than the agencies that chose not to teach it, older than the entire industrial feed system that has convinced 3 generations of American farmers that they cannot feed their own animals without writing a check to someone else every month. This knowledge was carried by people who understood that the land provides if you work with it instead of against it, People who measured wealth not by what they bought, but by what they did not need to buy. Your grandparents or your great-grandparents likely knew some version of this. They may not have grown Napier grass by name, but they understood the principle. They knew that a homestead should produce more than it consumes, that perennial systems outlast annual ones, and that any practice that requires you to purchase something new every season is a practice designed to benefit the seller, not the buyer. Somewhere along the line, that understanding was traded for convenience, and the convenience turned out to be a bill that never stops arriving. You now have a choice that most people never get, because most people never receive the information that makes the choice possible. You can continue operating inside a system that extracts money from your land and your labor every season, or you can plant something that grows 4 inches a day, feeds every animal on your property, heats your home through the winter, and never asks you to buy it again. The ground beneath your feet is not just dirt. It is a factory that has been waiting for you to turn it on. Start with 10 cuttings. Give it 1 season. The grass will do the rest.